The following video contains spoilers for all of Astral Chain. If you care about spoilers, drop this video in your watch later feed and play the game. Also, a massive thanks to Witched Saea for giving me feedback on the script and pointing out areas for much needed improvement. This video was a lot better thanks to them. Astral Chain existed in a very odd space in my brain for the time. I really liked the game. The Legion is a very unique gameplay feature that I had a lot of fun with. I think I started playing it in late 2019, then dropped it for a reason I can't remember exactly. I made several attempts at getting back into it, but my grasp on the plot slipped, so I found it hard to get into playing. Also, I naturally found a game set in an apocalypse with a deadly disease spreading across the world where you play as a cop unappealing in 2020. In 2021, I sorted my games onto a much more visible shelf. I made a decision to sort my games by which I've played and which I haven't. I separated my games like this so I wouldn't have to rack my brain as to what I've played when it comes time to pick a game off the shelf. The first game I started playing was SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, but I had a Switch version so the controls were dog shit. I then picked up Astral Chain again because I wanted to beat it finally after it gnawed at my brain for the past year because I didn't finish it. I booted the game up and made a new save file so I could get caught up with the story. Initially, I didn't intend to make a video on Astral Chain. I thought this could be something I could enjoy while I finished the videos I was working on at the time, but oh boy, I was wrong. There's a lot more to talk about here than I first thought, and a lot of it is not good stuff. The best way I can feel to represent this game is to cover different points about it, highlighting both the good and the bad. I originally intended to use my unpatented lasagna structure, but that plan was admittedly a little half-baked. I'm going to start this video by talking about the gameplay, because good lord, that is a light topic compared to this game's story.
Gaming.
The gameplay of the Legions is really fun and innovative. Legions are basically sci-fi stands, and that clearly appeals to the weeb in me. The way you press ZL and ZR to perform combos is an excellent feature that I don't understand why it isn't part of more beat-em-ups. I find myself not doing complex combos in most beat-em-ups because I have to shift my thumb between the face buttons. My brain just doesn't think like that. Meanwhile, with ZL and ZR, my brain only has to think about an individual finger pressing a button, which makes combos a lot easier. The Legion is a greatly realized mechanic that ties into the world well. I like how there's a variety in different Legions too. Sword has fast range attacks, bow is a sniper that moves super fast, arm hits like a truck but moves slow, beast is a dog, and axe is a tank. Sync attacks are really fun to pull off too. The sound effect you get every time you get the opportunity for one is so damn good. I also like how the game subverts my expectations by having variation in the way the L button moves work. Both sword and bow stand in place and you aim to hit some obstacle to make it not exist anymore. Initially I thought all of them were going to be repeats of this, but I was pleasantly surprised. Beast lets you run faster and have flashbacks to the Jack scene in Mario Odyssey. Arm lets you float above hazards and just and axe, it gives you a shield that is only useful for one chapter. One thing that's really nice is the Legion learning skill tree, because it allows you to make your Legions more powerful and it facilitates these absurdly satisfying finishers. The character customization is pretty solid too. You get plenty of options for clothes, hair, and accessories. It's also very nice how you aren't locked to specific genders. The list of series that pull this shit is way too large in number, and I'm glad this doesn't do that. Pokemon has failed to take the same approach for 3 generations despite both of the player characters having very similar models. Very good decision, Platinum Games. I also adore how you can choose whatever color you want for your clothes by adjusting RGB values. It always infuriates me when you're given a piece of clothing, but the color options are terrible. Astral Chain's player customization is perfect. It's like someone who hated these arbitrary restrictions much as I do designed this system. I love it. However, I wish I could say the same for the Legions. Whose idea was it exactly to make the Legion colors locked behind hunting down and killing these slimes? The slimes serve no purpose other than to add a series of unnecessary roadblocks to a feature that didn't need them at all. The slimes have no place in the world outside of this hindrance to the experience. It would have been so simple to allow using RGB values for Legion colors. I know this is simple because you actually can do it. It's just locked off until you kill all of the slimes, which again is pointless. This is particularly annoying because I made a custom color set for my player character that I loved. I didn't touch it for the rest of the game. I was annoyed because it took me going back to prior chapters during chapter 11 out of 11 and hunting down these gooey bastards to find the color set that sort of fit. I couldn't even adjust it because the game gives you colors in slot form. You get these presets that you can edit a bit, but you can only change the primary, secondary, and accent colors to one of these hard-locked colors. This infuriates me. All I wanna do is have my cyborg standos have matching colors with me, but no! I had to use this gaudy-ass pink that just looked like exposed muscles. None of the Legion's color schemes are good, and I could fix it if only there wasn't this arbitrary restriction in the way. I just want to look good in video games. How is it so hard for designers to get right?
Hey, you guys mind if I put in my mixtape?
On a different note, the game has some really great tracks. Dark Hero and Savior both give off incredible anime OP vibes, and again, as a weeb, this fits very good with me. Quite a lot of the area themes are good too, but Neuron HQ can fuck off. The song is so damn repetitive, and the vocals bring a lot of attention to that. For another point that focuses a lot on the gameplay, the Astral Plane sucks.
Disappointment in the game of life.
The role it plays within the chapters is boring, in both gameplay and the flow of the story. It interrupts the fun mix of combat, exploration, and puzzle solving in unique locations to give us the same stuff but in an uninteresting void. It's incredibly unfun and breaks up the flow of the game. It's no wonder why my favorite chapters either don't contain these sections at all or have them be very brief. Also, almost every Astral Plane section is chock full of waiting-based puzzles, and as someone with ADHD, I really hate that shit. Another point that borders both gameplay and story is the side quests. Astral Chain has some really great side quests. They gave me a sense of doing what police officers are meant to do. You disable bombs, question witnesses to solve crimes, and de-escalate situations. This is opposed to what police officers actually do. The different cases in this game vary wildly in content, which is something I love. I personally adore Carlos Kagioka. His questline is outrageously funny, and I had so much fun seeing it through to its conclusion. The way Carlos emphasizes words put me in fucking stitches. These quests all develop an incredible amount of fun side characters. For example, Alan thinks he's a rival to the player, despite him being nowhere near their level. I love how one of the achievements is taking a picture of him lying upside down on the ground. I also find it funny how incredibly unsubtle the line about Olive having a massive crush on Brenda as friends is. Come on, they share a one-bedroom apartment as friends, you guys. This same chapter also has one of my favorite side quests, where you perform magic tricks for a little girl, and it's playing with the idea that normal people can't see legions. It's nice when games make side quests that use facets of gameplay in interesting ways. Speaking of interesting thing that this game does that happen in Chapter 10, Legion Fusion is a terrific concept. It's so cool. It's an incredible set piece for really cool combat scenarios. Dark Hero is an awesome song, and the mechanic sucks ass in execution.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
First, it takes forever to charge. You can only get a single use out of it about once per chapter, and even then you're not going to get a lot of mileage out of it. Why? Because not only does it take forever to charge, but it also lasts for a pitiful amount of time. The meter drains at a rate of 5% per second. While taking damage will take away more time, and dealing damage will give you a little bit more time. Even if you avoid damage and keep up combos, you're still not going to get a lot out of it because the damage is pitiful. You have to make specialized builds with your equipped items to make Fusion viable, which is terrible on two levels. One, Fusion sucks enough to begin with that the player has to make it better themselves, and two, that same level of preparation could just be used for standard combat, and it would be even better because your strategy doesn't rely on a timed power-up. This infuriates me because the fix is so goddamn simple. Just give a way to buff the damage so it makes sense to use, and a way to buff the charge time so it adds the element of strategy deciding when to use it. A way to implement this that I really like is giving the fused form its own skill tree that works a bit differently from the rest. It would use points you earn by filling in those on the Legion chart so that Fusion gets better as your Legions get better because the Fusion is a product of the Legions. This also doesn't mean you're guaranteed to have a sucky ability. It would only have its base stats for when you calm down Akira in Chapter 10, which is scripted anyway. And my final complaint about Legion Fusion is that the colors don't match the color of your Legion. That would make the slick as hell design look even better, but I guess the game designers got bonked by the idiot stick every time they glanced at Legion customization. Okay, enough of the warm-ups, time for the big collective of talking points that spurred on this video. The story.
So get your face ready.
The introduction is really strong, actually. The concept of Legion gets introduced super well here. The opening cutscene shows the Sword Legion getting created, so when it's given to you to save your ass when you're getting the shit kicked out of you by a Chimera, it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina. I like this basic countermeasure against poor writing. I hope you get to see more of it, right? This game has some really great characters. Max is one of my personal favorites. Despite being around for close to the least amount of time, he has a really strong presence. He fills the role of keeping everyone else in line without ever coming across as harsh. He's a really great father figure. The way Akira reflects on him in Chapter 8 hit me hard. After the magic of spending time with your parents wears off for one reason or another, sometimes you get hit with moments that remind you really strongly of what it was like. This moment captured that extraordinarily well. Too bad this game treats Max and all the other people important to him and his kids like shit. Max dies early in the story, and not only are the 2 chapters he appears in the shortest in the game, but you also spend time with him for so little time. He doesn't show up until the end of Chapter 1, which is the shortest chapter. He's there for the beginning of Chapter 2, is cut from the bulk of it, and then only shows up again in the section in the Astral Plane where he dies. Jen and Alicia end up suffering from a similar problem. They're extremely minor characters outside of the chapters where you find their former Legion, and then they get shunted to the background for the rest of the game after that point. This creates a dissonance where you're told that Max was important to a lot of people, but you rarely see the people he was important to other than Akira, so he doesn't feel important. It also doesn't help that Max's Legion is easily the least useful. It doesn't help that you also get it super late, so you have to invest a lot of time to bring it up to the level that your Legion should already be at that point. It also has the worst ability in the game. The shield is the most situational of all the L moves, and all of its other merits get overshadowed by some serious Haru Okumura syndrome. Speaking of dissonance, let's talk about the player character. Player should not have been a silent protagonist. I'm going to be upfront about my reasoning here. I don't like a lot of silent protagonists. 70% of the time, they lack personality in an attempt to make a character anyone can project onto. The other 30% are good silent protagonists who have engaging personalities, like Link, the Inklings, and Joker. The protagonist, God, I'm gonna get sick of calling this character the protagonist. I'm gonna call him Akane because that's one of the default name options. Akane lacks personality. One thing Akane and a lot of other silent protagonists fail to bring to the table is a character who can drive the plot forward. Most of what happens to advance the plot is something another character tells you to do, or something the game tells you Akane wants to do without anything that supports that idea. Silent protagonists have their place, but Akane should really have been a character with actual dialogue and a personality. Another thing that this game fails to bring that should be brought with silent protagonists and narrative-heavy games is dialogue options for role-playing. Joker from Persona 5 is an excellent example of this. There are a lot of dialogue options that add character to the game's protagonist while not giving them any actual lines. You can roleplay the way you think Joker would respond in these situations. Astral Chain's dialogue choices amount to A, 2 responses that carry the same message with very little difference in connotations, and B, yes or no answers to a question. This game's writing would have had a lot more chances to shine if there were opportunities for banter between Akane and other characters. This game also has really interesting characters, but the writers don't seem to agree. A majority of characters who feature don't get the development they need. Alicia and Jen were 2 characters massively important to Max, and they both have a history with Akane and Akira. Both of them suffer from similar problems to Max, but I think it's worse in this regard. They're unimportant in the chapters where you aren't capturing their legions, and after you get the Beast Legion in Chapter 5, you barely see either of them for the rest of the game. This is more insulting than Max because it's least fitting for his characters who have a self-sacrifice moment. Jen and Alicia both would not take the events that they were booted from lightly. Neither of them would truly believe that the player is the type of person that Yosef paints them as for a hot minute in the story. It bears repeating that these two have known the Howard kids for a long time. Jen took care of them while Max was in the hospital, and Alicia sees herself as a mother figure to them. Astral Chain gives the majority of its characters the boot to focus on an uninteresting silent protagonist, Johnson Smith, and an anxiety-ridden teenager that desperately needs therapy. Now on to another thing I want to talk about before barreling into this storm.
The city.
I would say probably the strongest aspect about Astral Chain, narratively speaking, is the locations. The Archposition is a man-made landmass that has the last bit of humanity is a cool concept, and it provides a lot of opportunities for interesting locations that don't use the geography of normal places on Earth. One of the major locations that you finished in Astral Chain, Maison Forest, is probably the least interesting. It's one of the few major locations that you don't revisit. It's just a series of alleyways. There's so little here that the time spent is entirely forgettable. Zone 36 is a lot better. You revisit it in multiple sections, so it develops a distinct feel. It's a bustling shopping center, the chapter you first visited in, which makes the visit to it in chapter 7, where it's all abandoned, feel very intimidating. I also love how the location has a sense of verticality to it. I think this is partly because my sense of scale is pretty bad on the X and Z axes, so I find tall structures more interesting. This location is also home to Chapter 8, which has a nice cozy feel to it. Plus, the moments where the twins reminisce over their father is heart-wrenching. The hope in the moment where they hear that there's a faint signal coming from his Legatus, and then the despair when they find it dangling from the Axe Legion's neck is heart-wrenching. The last major location I'm talking about in this section is my favorite of the three. Harmony Square has a lot going for it. First off, you visit it the most by far, so the familiarity is strong. Harmony Square also has the best side quests. Harmony Square is great for having a lot of little moments. Helping a lost girl find her mom, giving ice cream to the sad child, and this hilarious use of the finisher animation where you get a balloon out of the tree. The bustling cityscape also lends to the same effect as Zone 36 when you evacuate the area to confront Jenna. There's another area I really love, but this requires talking about Chapter 6.
Welcome to the underground. How was the fall?
Chapter 6 is an extremely well-made chapter. It is a huge standout. There's so much I love here that one of the concepts I had for a video on Astral Chain was an essay about why I love this chapter so much. First off, the chapter starts with a visit to Harmony Square. Harmony Square is already one of my favorite locations, so it was a treat to visit it again. You also get to follow up on a prior side quest with Carlos Kagioka. Hell yeah, baby! I also like how the stealth section in the off-limits area is optional. You can get spotted and all you have to do is take out the guy that spotted you. I also love the feel of Sector V. Sector V is a great location. It has the aforementioned sense of verticality I love, plus a grunge aesthetic. This section marks a great contrast to the sanitized sci-fi city that we see everywhere else in the game. Prior visit to Harmony Square highlights this. This is my favorite information gathering section in the game too. I especially like the quest where you give this guy his lunch after he forgot it at home. He then explains that the person who told you to give him the lunchbox was his wife. Aww. This is my favorite way of getting a key item from a side quest. You get access to the Hermitonic by getting the card off this guy. Because he quit drinking because of his wife. That is so fucking wholesome. I love it. We also meet Kyle here. He's a really fun character. He has more personality than the entirety of Neuron put together. I love the way that he tests the player by throwing goons at them and then jumps in himself. I also love this line in particular.
There's no union in Sector 5, no state, no real economy. The most valuable thing we've got is information. And you're looking at a very rich man. Wall or no wall, if it can be known, we hermits know it.
Sadly, though, he suffers from the same character neglect that pretty much everyone else does. He shows up for one chapter, and then we see a shot of his back at the end of the game. That's just lame, man. The chase at the end was fun, too. I like that the Astral Chain section wasn't very long, and I've said my piece on those already. I also like how the Astral Chain bleeds into the real world, and there's a really hectic scene. Speaking of, another feature I like about this chapter is that it incorporates puzzle solving with the 4 legions you have at that point. Now that you're at a point that the game doesn't force spotlight on a particular one, all of them get a chance to shine. I also like how this chapter gives Hal a chance to shine. Before, he was an interruption and a Navi clone, but he really came into his own in this chapter. Speaking of Hal, I love how Zone 09 pops up again when you get to his hideout. This is probably helped by the fact that I don't really like Neuron HQ because the prominent, loud vocals in the music make the fact that the track is repetitive really obvious. Hal's hideout is also in Zone 09, so checkmate, Neuron. Another thing I love about Chapter 6 is that it's positioned before the point where a lot of my issues with the story arise. It's a damn good time. Now we get into the part of the game where the problems stop being minor annoyances and start being major issues.
It was me all along. Johnson Smith.
Yosef is an extremely unsubtle twist villain. He's on the same level of subtlety as Lysanderoth in the skit by ProZD parodying twist villains that the game treats as more clever than they actually are. Yosef is a terrible twist villain. Because of one thing I'll touch on later, not only does he act as a villain for an incredibly small amount of time, but he's a worse antagonist than the one before. Jenna was interesting. I liked how she challenged the idea of saving the world and made you question whether or not you were doing the right thing. But whoops! She dies because of redemption equals death disease, and Yosef shows himself as evil in the exact same fucking cutscene. Yosef is terribly written, but I guess that was the writer's mistake. Now we move on to the real meat and potatoes, la pièce de résistance, the synonym for really important thing.
Time for pain. I'm ready.
This game's story gets a lot worse after Chapter 9. Strap in, folks, because this specific section is one hell of a doozy. First problem is a reiteration. Yosef is a terrible villain. My immediate reaction on my first playthrough during his introduction was the voice of Mermaid Man echoing in my head. Even if you don't pick up on the sinister overtones in the first scene, it's still incredibly obvious that he's evil. He has a scene where he talks to mysterious hologram benefactors in a large dark room. No character meets people like this without being evil, except Nick Fury, but he was telling the hologram people to fuck off in that scene. Yosef doesn't feel like a master manipulator. He feels like a corporate CEO that you don't trust intuitively, so it's not a twist when he's evil. My next problem is the pacing. This final stretch feels like the game was intended to be a lot longer, but it got shortened. The fake-out final boss fight against Jenna felt like a good midway point, or at least end of the second act. The ending where Yosef reveals his true colors would have been the scene where things get a lot worse than in the middle of the second act. In fact, it still does feel like the second act darkest hour, but when Act 1 and Act 2 are so long, 2B and 3 feel short. 1 and 2A happen over the course of 9 chapters, while 2B and 3 end up happening over the course of 2. I personally feel that this series of events would have worked a lot better if Chapter 9 was the midpoint. A fake-out final boss would have been perfect for this stage of the game, and it would have made Yosef a better antagonist because he would have had some more time to act as one. Jenna was a constant threat, and every scene with her was interesting. Her attempts at expediting the apocalypse felt like real threats to the world. Yosef never gets to reach the same heights as Jenna because he had no time to. Even him becoming Noah Prime in the final battle doesn't feel threatening because Yosef has no presence on his own. This would triple the threat level for most villains. In fact, there are plenty of great examples of good villains becoming more threatening with a similar plot device and it working well. For Yosef, it results in him going from a 1 to a 3 out of 10, which is still a failing grade. So what I'm going to do over the course of these next few paragraphs is take a page out of Nando V Movies' book. Nando makes a series of videos where he pitches a change to a movie and goes how that would change its events and address some problems. I'm doing the same thing because Astral Chain honestly deserves a better finale than what it got, and I love hypotheticals. Let's begin with a narrative decision that I would undo. In the original, Jenna is killed off after the player does the accidental fusion. Jenna staying alive as an ally throughout the rest of the game would have been far more interesting. She opposes Yosef on principle, so she would have an uneasy alliance with the player in the same enemy of my enemy situation a lot of stories do when they introduced a new antagonist. Her insights on what Yosef has done would be really interesting. She could exposit a lot of lore that is clunkily tucked away in the rest of the game. Maybe during a section where you're walking to a destination, there could be an exchange of dialogue where Jenna exposits why the Howard twins can sync with their legions better than anyone else. That information about the Howard twins' origins is locked away in side quests, and while I love this game's side quests, that is the exact wrong place to put it. Now, the biggest problem that Jenna joining as a friend would present is being too powerful, but it's easy to nerf her in the story so she can't solve problems for Akane. All that has to happen is to say that Jenna had used everything she had in her battle, and/or she is injured, so all she can offer is intelligence. Jenna would be far more interesting as an ally for the second half of the game. Speaking of this game giving up on interesting possibilities, there is no reason for Alicia and Jin to get shafted like they did. I know I'm proposing a lot of changes in this section, but please bear with me. After waking up in Hal's hideout, Akane is not joined by just Olive, but also Brenda and Jenna. Then, the first chapter in the second half of the game would focus on meeting up with Jin and Alicia. You get a covert message from them in Hal's hideout. They want you to meet up so they can talk. They want to join up with you, but if the commander is right, they'll take you in. Now, I'm going to lay out some very rough ideas for future chapters in this hypothetical rewrite of Astral Chain. In this new Chapter 10, you go through the same sewer system you go through to find Brenda in the original. Also, when this scene where you defend Olive from a chimera happens, it then disappears for a bit instead of fighting you immediately. You meet up with Alicia and Jen, they join up with you, but surprise! Yosef has sent some ravens to track down Jen and Alicia. Now that they see you, they're going to try and take you out. You then scuffle the two ravens for a bit in an unwinnable boss fight, but then it's interrupted by that chimera from earlier. It throws the two ravens into some gates and they die on the way to their home planet or something, I don't know. And then you kill the chimera. Then in the following chapter, you sabotage one of Yosef's operations from the shadows, but it's guarded by the ravens and Akira. The chapter then ends with the revelation that the ravens are Akira clones and unlocking Legion Fusion. It's basically the same as when you fight Akira at the end of Chapter 10. Akira then joins with their assembling, and we get a few chapters of this game confronting Yosef's plans. One reason this should go on for a few chapters is because one problem with Legion Fusion that I neglected to mention earlier is that you have no time to use it. You get at the end of Chapter 10, and then the final chapter is Chapter 11. This would likely mean you only use it a couple of times if you don't immediately go back to prior chapters to get secrets. Putting the final chapter further back allows the mechanic of Legion Fusion to come into its own. One idea I have for the penultimate chapter is that there would be a Legion factory. This is because another change I'm making. It's honestly stupid that Yosef can achieve JRPG godhood with a few Akira clones. I understand that on a technical level, this animation of clones stabbing each other and turning into orbs would be hard to render for a whole army, but it's still stupid narratively, and I'm changing it for my hypothetical that doesn't have to worry about time or money. My version involves him requiring an army of clones outfitted with legions to reach his apotheosis, and since the player sabotages legion creation efforts, he doesn't have enough legions to be powerful enough to beat the player. Next up is my final criticism of the actual game. The final boss is kind of trash. It's not even hard, it's just tedious. Pretty much the only thing any player would find hard is this near instant death black hole attack that you can only beat by hopping on the Beast Legion and running away. Tangent about mechanics aside, Noah Prime is honestly a much worse boss than Jenna. It lacks the same escalation through different forms. Jenna was pulling out all the stops to try and beat you, and it felt like I was holding on by the skin of my teeth in that battle. Noah's fight was piss easy. It also doesn't give the same feeling of being powerful when you're winning because Noah Prime doesn't really react to what you do. It just stands there and flinches slightly when you hit it. It also lacks the same feeling of scale because both Noah Prime is smaller than Jenna's final form and you're in a box hovering above the city, so you don't see the city down there. I don't have a lot of solutions here. Despite how cliche it is, I think Noah Prime should be impossible to beat for a bit. Then the real Akira absorbed inside Noah's core would call out to you and tear down his defenses for you to go to town on him. It was baffling to me that more rule of cool shit like this didn't happen in the game, given that it was made by a studio known for games like Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and Bayonetta. In short, my thought on Astral Chain is that it's a good game, but it's weighed down by some elements that were handled poorly. I want to emphasize that I do not think that any of these people who worked on Astral Chain are hacks, or that I alone could have done a better job. The video game industry is very messy, and as long as time constraints and budgets are a factor, there is no way that any game can be perfect. This video was a fun exercise where I thought of what I do and don't like about this game and how it could be changed. Now, to cap off this video, I want to talk about something weird that happened when I played this game. I encountered a glitch during the end credits where my Pro Controller vibrated on a consistent setting for over a minute straight. Now, what's supposed to happen is that the Joy-Cons vibrate and sync to the beat of the theme of the credits, but I'm guessing that they didn't playtest this for a Pro Controller because it receives both signals at once and it doesn't have the minute rumble features that everyone forgets the Joy-Con has, so it just rumbled consistently on the same setting for a minute straight. Hello everybody, thanks for making it to the end of this video. This video took a lot longer to make than I first thought it would. I was writing this before my Xenoblade theory even came out, and there were a lot of complications getting this video done. I didn't start the game wanting to make a video, so I didn't capture a lot of videos, which is how I get clips for my videos. Then I wrote up a 14-page long script and tried to make do with what I had. I then had to spend a week recording new footage. It was a whole mess, and it also happened to happen during state tests, so that was a further complication. Also, an interesting detail about this video is that when I started writing it, I had a vivid image in my head of a video with Astral Chain in the thumbnail and it being 28 minutes long and some change. And that's the exact length that this video has come out to. Again, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful time and goodbye.